Hi there, hope you're all well, and a very warm welcome back to At the Movies with Andrew, which as you see is my very own self. For those of you just joining us, this is my occasional series where I quickly rattle off my thoughts of the fresh delights and not so fresh delights of what has been playing at the cinema over the past month. And so here we are with this episode. We're into February 2019. Winter has well and truly settled in. The Oscar contenders are playing in full swing. And yet despite that, I've noticed that the box office has taken a downturn in comparison to this time last year, where we had such big hits like Jumanji, Welcome to the Jungle, and Coco, and The Greatest Showman, and there hasn't so far been such a strong mainstream blockbuster hit to draw in audiences, and it has kind of shown. I mean, you do have things like A Star is Born and Bohemian Rhapsody playing in the odd cinema here and there, because it is the Oscars, and everybody loves musicals, except those that don't. But it looks like we have one or two crowd pleasers coming up on the horizon this month. Will they be enough to bring up the fortunes of loyal cinema goers like myself? Well, let's get stuck in and find out. Right, our first movie this month is Glass, the latest movie from M. Night Shyamalan, Lama Rama Lama Ding Dong. No, that's not fair. M. Night Shyamalan, and not only that, it is the long-awaited and keenly anticipated third part of the Unbreakable trilogy, a trilogy that we didn't even know was coming or existed. To bring you up to speed, in the year 2000, when M. Night Shyamalan was still a budding, promising, credible filmmaker, his second movie, I believe, was Unbreakable, which not only showed signs of his storytelling genius to the world, but turned out to be a superhero comic book movie in disguise during a time when Batman and Robin existed, and the genre wasn't exactly in full heights. I don't know if Bryan Singer's X-Men was on the horizon or playing around this time, but this was a thriller that just happened to spring on you, metatextual deep thematic discussion about superheroes and comic books. What if superheroes existed in the real world? In this case with Bruce Willis's character of David Dunn, who turned out to be indestructible and eventually used his powers for good to save people, only to discover that his then mentor, the brittle-boned, wheelchair-bound Elijah Price, played by Samuel L. Jackson, was orchestrating all the murders and horrible incidents that brought Bruce Willis's powers to fruition, much to his horror, because he was a psychopath. He was a genius, but he was also a psychopath who saw himself as the Lex Luthor to Bruce Willis's Superman. So yeah, in that respect, this film has been credited with giving proper credibility and weight to what some saw as people in brightly coloured spandex falling into radioactive waste and other childish rubbish like that. This is a proper, mature discussion of these themes. Cut to 2017, I believe, with another of M. Night Shyamalan's movies, Split, which was all about James McAvoy as this psychopath who was not only kidnapping young girls, but it turned out he had an extreme case of multiple personality disorder. So one moment he was Patricia, the next he was Matt Knight, and all silly stuff like that. But he was hoping to bring out a new personality, the Beast. And by the end, he had brought out the Beast, which was basically just him bare-chested with super strength and roiding out like the Hulk, which some audience members kind of found hilarious. But point was, he was a psychopath and killed people, and one girl, played by Anna Taylor-Joy, got off scot-free. But just when the end credits started and everyone thought there wasn't a twist, which was highly unusual for Mr. Shyamalan. We cut to a scene where the police were reporting on all this in a cafe, and in a cafe we see a man and he turns his head and it was Bruce Willis, his character. And then the man sitting next to me in the cinema started bouncing up and down, enjoying delight, which was rather unnerving, but I could see, share or appreciate his enthusiasm. This whole thing, Split, was a hidden follow-up or sequel to Unbreakable. It was set in the same world, and shortly afterwards M. Night Shyamalan came out and said, yes, I am planning a Bruce Willis versus James McAvoy movie, and it'll be the big climactic showdown. It'll be the close of this thematic superheroes in the real world trilogy. And people like me were very excited. So we come to this movie after that long little setup. Sorry about that. So the great big fight. The big showdown between James McAvoy's psychopath killer and Bruce Willis, who we learn has gone on to use his superhero powers for good as this cloaked vigilante known as the Overseer. Yeah, that name doesn't sound remotely villainous or dodgy at all. But so here we go, the setup, the tense setup, and that he has to scout around, and we see that James McAvoy's Kevin Crumb has kidnapped young girls again. He's going, the beast is coming for you guys. Just be patient, girls. Oh, yes. And also the build-up, the setup, the tension, the pacing, and finally the big fight. Was it all worth it for the last 2 years of build-up? Yes. For the first 20 minutes or half an hour, you get the fight that we've all been expecting, and with the low budget, or at least real world physics and logic that the world has to adhere to, no flashy bangs or lasers or anything, it's actually quite a tensely, closely directed fight and punch up. But then they crash outside the building that Bruce Willis has tracked James McAvoy down to, and they both get arrested by the police and taken away to an asylum. At which point this movie doesn't so much take a nosedive as it plummets at terminal velocity. I am sorry to report that after such a promising setup, we do get a very turgid, tepid, drawn-out middle of this movie, set in this insane asylum. Not only with these sterile, empty rooms and empty, echoing hallways, with not only cells for Bruce Willis, James McAvoy, and third inmate, which turns out to be Samuel L. Jackson's Elijah Price, who's been locked up here all these years, and all three rooms are right next door to each other. No one saw any problem with that, any potential threat with that. But also they seem to be the only 3 inmates in this entire asylum. And there only seem to be like 3 staff members who seem like they're on part-time at that. Yeah, the budget really does betray itself, or rather the script writing does with this. But head of all this is Sarah Paulson's psychiatrist, whose name I forget, but she specializes in the field of people who believe they are superheroes. So not only do you get large swathes of this middle portion, we're all focused up on Sarah Paulson's concerned face like this. But she goes on to not only explain to us, but lecture us. Get up on a great big podium and lecture us, M. Night, through this script, through this character. Very heavy-handed, pseudo-intellectual waffle about comic books and the psychological nature of superheroes. Do you remember the end of Kill Bill Volume 2, where Bill has Uma Thurman tranquilized so he can spend 5 minutes going on about why Superman is his favorite comic book character, because you see, Kal-El's Superman is the real identity. It's Clark Kent that is the hidden identity. It's Clark Kent is a commentary on Kal-El's opinion of the human race. Yeah, imagine stuff like that stretched out to an entire movie, and this is kind of what you got here with her going about the villain. You are the villain. You are the mirror image of the superhero. You, Bruce Willis, you believe are the protector because you went through great damage in your life. You, James McAvoy, you believe that you have been hurt by the world, and so you have to fight out against those that are different to you. M. Night Shyamalan, I don't quite know how, I do know how to break this to you actually. It's not the year 2000 anymore. This might have been deep and meaningful back in Unbreakable, but you see, Black Panther came out last year. Think of that. Kids, people dress up as Iron Man all the time. We go and watch Spider-Man. We can rent Spider-Man and watch it whenever we want. The comic book superhero genre isn't exactly that unknown anymore. We've had these discussions to ourselves and our friends. This isn't as deep as you think it is, and you're spending a whole movie. But what about our central characters? Well, James McAvoy, as I perhaps suggested with his switching between personalities at the drop of a hat, and he is comedic. He is the most engaging of our trio, even though he is rather chewing the scenery here, perhaps a little more than he did in Split. Bruce Willis, I'm sorry to report, is sleepwalking. This seems to be an unfortunate trait in his recent films that he's just, I'm just here to recite my lines and, okay, where's my paycheck? He should be deep and meaningful and solemn, but he just comes across like he's half awake. Don't do this. Stuff like that, and he's supposed to be our hero. And Samuel L. Jackson, the guy whose character, Mr. Glass, whose the name is named after this movie, he is in his wheelchair, and because he's been without purpose, he's been emotionally traumatized for decades in this movie. He's catatonic for a large portion of the movie. It's just shots of him staring, silent. I mean, it's meant to be like he's thinking of something, but he's not doing anything. And so yeah, empty echoing corridors and asylum with Samuel L. Jackson just being quiet for a good half an hour or so. I went to see this with a friend. I won't embarrass him by mentioning him by name, but I did notice he was gently snoring through most of this movie. And when he saw that Samuel L. Jackson, this movie was not going anywhere. They were stuck in these rooms, held prisoner by Sarah Paulson, not going anywhere while she goes on about the mythology and psychology of superheroes. He got up to go and take a toilet break. And it was at this point that Samuel L. Jackson, the cogs of his brain started going. He started coming up with his master plan to get them all out of there, and wheels himself into the computer security camera rooms and all that. I almost wanted to call out to him and say, something's happening now. You can come back. That's kind of a real shame. And at the end of the movie, we got up, and there was a guy there with a bag, an usher, and he did turn to this usher and say, "That movie was terrible." Sir, I'm just here to pick up the popcorn in the seats. I wouldn't quite call it utterly irredeemable. I'm sure you're all expecting me to give it the lowest ranking here, but in its we'll try and say a couple of positive things here. The production itself was competent enough. I know that sounds like damning it with faint praise, but care was put, I could see that care was put into framing and composition and the sets and the lighting, with the colour hues. There was real creativity here. And as the third in a trilogy, you're kind of obliged to watch it if you've seen Unbreakable and Split to see what happens. But there was nice payoff in a couple of areas, like Anna Taylor-Joy's character comes back and who still feels sympathetic and troubled and caring towards James McAvoy's character, and I especially liked the guy who played Bruce Willis's son, his little boy, way back in 2000's Unbreakable. They got that actor back, and he's all grown up, and he's still playing Bruce Willis's son, and he's become the Alfred or the Oracle to Bruce Willis's Batman overseer character. And I could sort of tell that maybe he's not really done much in the way of acting since the year 2000, but he was good for what this required to be Bruce Willis's loyal and smart thinking son. So I appreciated that. While I think about it, yes, there is a twist. The water is wet and the sky is blue. Of course, there's a twist in M. Night Shyamalan's movie. Without spoiling it, there was a twist with James McAvoy's character. I thought, okay, I didn't see that coming, and that does tie things together. There was a twist with Sarah Paulson's character that I saw coming 10 miles away. And the final twist, the final shot, the final reveal of the whole movie is supposed to be shocking and meaningful, but it just made me think, M. Night, you clearly don't understand how social media works, or how the internet works, or how people would realistically react to this. So, yeah, in conclusion, I didn't hate it as much as my friends did, but I have to be honest here and give this movie a great big fat fudging forget it. I mean, I'm sorry, people, but we should have seen this coming. It's a law of averages, a physical law of the universe. We saw it with The Last Airbender. We saw it with Lady in the Water. The Visit and Split were good, self-contained, low-budget thrillers, but as soon as you give M. Night Shyamalan too much money and too much control, this is what you come up with. This is what you come out with. Next, Can You Ever Forgive Me? That's the name of the next movie I'm talking about, by the way. I'm not asking that, although I've had cause to ask that to many people throughout my adult life. But I digress. This is most likely the last of the big Oscar contender award nominated movies that I'll be watching for this year. And like other Oscar movies I've talked about before, this is based on a true story. Ooh. Directed by Marielle Heller, this tells the story of how in the early 90s, biographer and writer Lee Israel, here played by Melissa McCarthy of all people, was on hard times. She was, as we see in the movie, she's 3 months behind on her rent. Her beloved elderly cat is sick. She's really caustic and hostile. She's not a people person, let's put it that way. She's trying to get her latest project going, even though she walks into bookshops and sees great big 75% off discounts of all her books. You know, just get this damn thing off the shelf. She's not fashionable, basically, unlike Tom Clancy, who they keep talking about derivatively. She's trying to get a project about vaudeville comedienne Fanny Bryce going, much to the disdain and distaste of her agent, who does say, "Who the hell is Fanny Bryce? That's not Fanny Bryce is not sexy. You can't do it. You can't do anything with that. You need to find another way of making money." And make it fast. So life isn't too good to Lee Israel, but a couple of things happen. First, she discovers a drinking partner, inadvertently comes across a kindred spirit, this elderly gay rake, this grifter, con man, Jack Hawk, played by Richard E. Grant. But a little more to the point, in order to make ends meet, she's trying to sell off papers, letters by famous people that she's discovered in her research just to get on by. And when she tries selling a Fanny Bryce letter, I believe, to a nice bookseller, she gets a paltry sum for it, and the bookseller makes the casual remark, if this had had more salacious content or more exciting content, I would have paid more money for it. This gives Lee Israel the idea of going back to one of her other letters, typing in a little PS and saying, here's a much better letter by Fanny Bryce that I've discovered. And of course she makes lots of money from this, and then gets the idea, if I pretend to be people like great literary figures like Fanny Bryce and Noel Coward and Dorothy Parker, which is where the title comes from, and also the remark, I'm a better Dorothy Parker than Dorothy Parker. So she goes to booksellers throughout New York, forging these letters and getting them for great sums of money. So the money's coming in, albeit illicitly. She's enlisted Richard E. Grant as a partner in crime, and all seems great, up until the point that it doesn't, because one person says that Noel Coward would have never said something like this, and the long arm of the law and all that. So yeah, as far as awards movies go, this isn't one of those big boisterous action melodramatic pieces. This is very much a sedate and melancholic but very dry-witted and caustic character piece. And I really enjoyed it, mostly down due to the great chemistry that Melissa McCarthy and Richard E. Grant share with each other. I have heard that originally Chris O'Dowd was going to be in the role of Jack, and yet I can't think of anyone other than Richard who would have brought this such magnetic charisma and sharp wit to this movie. I mean, yes, he is doing the Richard E. Grant performance, and despite his comments in interviews to the contrary about this, it's hard not to look at this character and think, yeah, this is where Withnail ended up. And because of this rapport with Melissa McCarthy, you do buy that they share common beliefs and traits of being past their prime. I mean, Melissa McCarthy says at one point, I'm over 50, I'm fat, and I'm a lesbian. That's not sexy. I can't sell that to the public. So that you can tell that they're getting old. He's meant to be a gay rake, but he's in his 50s now, so he feels increasingly old and isolated. They're both outsiders, and I did share in their friendship. But Melissa McCarthy in particular, I was really surprised that yes, there is humour in this, but she's behaving like an actual actor in this movie. She elevates the material to some extent, but in this movie, Lee Israel is, as I say, a bit of a misanthrope, bit grumpy. She only cares about her cat, and she's in it for herself. And although by the end, when she's caught, she does express some contrition that she feels like she was hiding behind her own voice. She was using the voice of others, like Richard E. Grant says, you're impersonating other people. Nobody's buying Lee Israel letters. There is some guilt there, but she does say, I don't regret my actions. This has been the best time of my life. She refreshingly, for a movie like this, remains a misanthrope. She stays true to who she is, really. She's not a miser that suddenly discovers the true meaning of Christmas or something. there's that, and yet Melissa McCarthy and her expressions and her acting makes her curiously sympathetic. So that was a real star turn here. If I had to nitpick this movie at all, I would say that because this is set in the upmarket, sophisticated bookshop corner of New York City, there is an underlying jazzy piano soundtrack. It's very reminiscent of Woody Allen, but if you feel like a jazz piano soundtrack in a movie of this type is very stereotypical and wearisome, well, get used to it because it plays throughout the whole movie. But in every other respect, this was for me a perfect matinee for a wet Tuesday afternoon. But more to the point, this is a Melissa McCarthy movie in which she doesn't fall over and fart every 5 seconds. And after the last couple of years of dreck like the Happy Time Murders, she really needed a movie like this. I guess this goes to show, if nothing else, that as an actor or as a creative individual, you need to have several cards on your deck playing all at once. So if that one thing falls apart, at least you've got this project to look forward to. And with her being nominated for the Oscars for this and being nominated for the Razzies with the Happy Time Murders, how'd you do that? How'd you end up in heaven and hell all at once? But hey, this is certainly something to be treasured and checked out if you're curious, if you're into this sort of sedate, like I say, melancholic and very witty piece of comedy drama. And this gets a very strong buy it. So to answer the question of this movie, no, but at least I don't hate you. Right, my next movie is Alita Battle Angel, a new action movie based on the seminal manga by Yukito Kishiro. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. This has been a long time coming, this movie. It was initially conceived by James Cameron around 2003, I believe. He's got too many Avatar sequels to work on, apparently, so this has ended up being directed with close supervision by Robert Rodriguez. To go through the premise very quickly, it's the 26th century. Earth has been through a bitter and nasty war with the Martian colonists. Ugh. And following that, and especially after a great catastrophe, the remnants of humanity are split between the opulent, aspirational and super rich sky city of Salem, and all the peasants living in the dirty, cruddy, mechanical scrap heap city down below. Most of which dream the impossible dream of one day going up to Salem, even though Salem won't have any of that. Yeah, it's dark, it's dirty, it's grungy, and to give you an idea of how desperate people are for health and medicine, if you get a splinter in your hand one day, then it's very much right, your hand has to come off and be replaced by a mechanical hand. A good portion of the population are half mechanical cyborgs at this point, which is good business for those mechanics and doctors willing to supply new arms and parts, one of which is Dr. Dyson Ido, played by Christoph Waltz, who goes to the junkyard scrap heap one day to look for anything that can be salvaged, and discovers the torso of a girl who's half broken off, but her head and her brain are miraculously intact and salvageable against all the odds. And it just so happens Dr. Ido has a spare body for a absent daughter that he doesn't want to talk about. So hey, let's rebuild her. We have the technology. And they do, and he names her Alita. Again, there might be a daughter reason why for that, but Alita doesn't remember anything about where she's come from, but hey, she's got a loving surrogate father figure. But the more that she explores the world that she's in, the more she discovers that Dr. Ido has a little nighttime job on the side as a cyborg bounty hunter. The more that certain figures in the underworld become aware of Alita and what she's physically capable of, or what secrets she might hold in that amnesiac brain of hers, the more Alita discovers that there's certainly physically more to her than we initially thought, in a psychological, in a combat sense. That's all I'll say. Yes, this is directed by Robert Rodriguez, and you can tell to a certain extent by the ratings pushing violent action on display. Lots of cyborg criminal characters get chopped up into nice, nasty pieces, but hey, they're mostly cyborgs, so that's all right. There's no real blood or anything. That being said, there was a moment with a little dog that we cut away before we can see it, but that was quite a nasty moment. But despite that, I'd say that this is a movie that definitely has James Cameron's fingerprints all over it, due to his characteristic expensive CGI. This movie cost a lot of money to make, and it does show with the CGI green screen motion capture galore in this movie, and more to the point, world building, with the sets and the costume designs and all the multitude of extras in the background, and the conviction from the likes of Rosa Salazar as Alita and Christoph Waltz as Dr. Ido. You do get the proper sense that this is a properly lived-in environment, that you could turn around a corner and follow an extra and they would have a very detailed backstory as well. In that respect, it was more convincing, maybe exactly as thought out, but more convincing than Mortal Engines, if you remember me talking about that last year. But quite similar to Avatar, that yes, the world building, the environment, the backgrounds are all beautiful and detailed, but because of this, the dialogue does rather suffer as a consequence. It's very simplistic. We're talking almost George Lucas levels here. There is a particular scene between Alita and her sweet biker boyfriend love interest that made me laugh out loud. Does it bother you that I'm not completely human? You are the most human person I know. Yeah, it's that cheesy. Also, as a big CGI dependent action blockbuster, the narrative and the pacing of this movie at a whopping 2 hours long does sporadically stop to show off Alita moving in slow motion, or to do a great big anime superhero pose. But it is, despite that, they are very admittedly impressive superhero poses and action fight sequences. And for all that, despite that, and because we spend time moving from find out where you came from originally to, oh, I want to be a motorball death race sport contestant, and flip here, there, and everywhere, that certain supporting characters do get left out for long periods, like half an hour later. Oh yeah, I forgot you existed. Mahershala Ali, whose character I forget, but he's meant to be the villain in this, is really just boils down to evil man in sunglasses. But yeah, the action is impressive, and there is enough surface thematic depth about what is humanity, what is human, does a cyborg have a soul. There is a bit of that from time to time, particularly in the sub-Pinocchio Geppetto relationship that we have between Rosa Salazar and Christoph Waltz. They do carry that off. But probably my biggest nitpick with this, and it was unavoidable, there's no real way round this without damaging the integrity of the script and the plot. This is based on a 6-volume manga, and I think this movie covers the first 2 volumes, so you couldn't squeeze everything into 1 2-hour movie. But this does share a similar problem with The Darkest Minds, which I've talked about before, what I like to call the Golden Compass syndrome sometimes. But yes, this movie wants to be a franchise without having established that they're going to make a sequel. It ends on a whopping big cliffhanger. I won't spoil the ending, which is suitably tragic and heart-tugging, but we then get to we still don't know where Alita came from, but we do know there's a great big evil mastermind up on Zalem who might know exactly where Alita came from and is behind all this suffering. And now we can get a closer look at him, and he's played by Edward Norton. Okay, so what? But more than that, it's like, I don't know where I came from, but I will go up to Salem one day, Edward Norton. I will confront you, and I will fight you, and I will know where I will find out who I am, raising her sword aloft to the sky, and I will see you in part 2. Yeah, given the astronomical cost of making this movie versus the box office takings so far, I wouldn't be so sure about that. This is a great big to be continued, and we don't even know if this is going to be continued at this point. But you know what? Unlike something like the Mortal Engines, I actually do want this to continue. I want to see more of this. I had fun with this movie. It's a CGI blockbuster, heavily dependent on that, with kind of all the connotations that implies with scripting and storytelling. But again, the CGI in of itself was impressive, and the actors really sold us this world, and I would like to see more of it. So I'm giving this a very comfortable watch it. And my last movie for February 2019 was the Lego Movie 2, the second part. I see what you did there. As you can tell, it's the sequel to an earlier movie, the Lego Movie, directed by Mike Mitchell, but still written and produced by the directors of the previous movie, Phil Lord and Christopher Miller. Presumably they were too busy with Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, and especially Solo, a Star Wars story. Speaking of which, looking at these movies, I have to ask, is there a Lord and Miller cut of the Han Solo movie that we can watch? Because I have to ask at this point, what was so terrible about that original vision that caused the Star Wars producers, Kathleen Kennedy, to hire safe as a house filled with pillows Ron Howard to direct it? How could that be any worse than the version that we actually got? But I digress a little. To set up the premise of this movie, following on from the cliffhanger ending of the first Lego movie, and I didn't even know it was a cliffhanger ending, the Lego people, led by Emmett, played by Chris Pratt, are now caught in eternal terrible war with the Duplo aliens. If you saw the first Lego movie and saw its third act twist and its ending, I won't go into detail here, but if you saw that, you know exactly what's going on here. And to be fair, they don't make a great attempt to hide what's really going on, with references to the Duplo aliens coming from the Sis Star system, and how to get there. You have to travel up the stair gate and through the kitchen dimension, and if you stray too far, that you'll end up in a terrible netherworld from which there is no escape under the dryer. Yeah, but the supporting players, the friends of Emmett, including Lego Batman and Wildstar, get kidnapped by General Mayhem and taken to the Sistar system, which is ruled by the suspicious Queen whatever wannabe, this sort of shape-shifting octopus sassy black lady mass of moving shifting Legos, which was actually quite fluid animation, quite a nice touch. And so Emmett, going off to rescue them, comes across a handsome, dashing, rugged space traveller called Rex Dangervest, who is also voiced by Chris Pratt, partly because he's basically a parody of all the roles that Chris Pratt has played in the past few years. He is an archaeologist, he's a cowboy, he's a raptor trainer, he's a space hero, and he feels that he can teach Emmett the ways of being tough and manly, and by being tough and manly and more of a ruthless hero, he will be able to rescue his friends and save the day, supposedly. Nobody expected let's be honest, nobody expected anything of the first animated Lego movie back in 2014. We saw it announced and we all said, I've heard of children's movies or children's TV shows being glorified toy commercials, but you're really taking the mick here with this. So yeah, we all went in with low expectations, and then it turned out to be quite witty and witty for all ages, entertaining and colourful for all ages, and its theme song "Everything Is Awesome" came out a week or so later, and everybody was entertained, except my mum. She'll go with anything with me to the cinema, but that was a very rare case where she almost walked out halfway through, because for her it was the epitome of children's movies these days being nothing but a lot of noise and colour on screen and frantic talking and shouting and screaming kids in the audience. Don't worry, I didn't drag her to this movie. But a point here to make, which I'll elaborate on later, is that after this, and now we have the second movie, or rather the fourth, technically the fourth movie, because we've also had Lego Batman movie and Lego Ninjago movie. It's sort of now everybody knows what to expect coming into this. Not including things like, oh look, here's Lego Batman being a comedic emo. Again, we've had this joke about once or twice already, but generally there's a lot of frenetic and frantic pacing and plotting with this movie, but more so than the first one, which at least had a sense of build-up of its plot. But this feels very much like a child with Legos, playing with Legos on a sugar high, like they're here in Apocalypseburg, and then the aliens are attacking them, and then they go to the other galaxy, and then they go to the meteors, and then this, and then now they're on top of a wedding cake, and now they've met the sparkly vampire people, and this happened, and this happened, and this happened. Which I could see being wearying for more adult members of the audience, and yet kind of because of this frantic constant barrage, the humour never stops with this. The humour remains constant and self-aware, quick fire jokes, so even if you didn't like one, don't worry, another one will come along very shortly. And like I said, very self-aware, very referential, and with genuine sentiment and thematic depth, especially by the time we get to the third act twist. What do I mean by thematic depth? Well, this does, because of the whole Sistar system thing versus the brooding denizens of Apocalypseburg. This felt like a commentary on gender roles, as I kind of expected going into this with a premise like that. Initially, how boys play with Legos and toys versus how girls play with Legos and toys. When we get to the Sistar system, it's very colourful and glittery, and like I said, some of the denizens are sparkly, Twilight friendly vampires, the safe kind of vampires, and let's dress up and let's have tea parties and all that. But it does develop on from there, I'm pleased to say, and it does develop into ideas of what we would consider masculinity, especially in these politically correct or reassessment times. What is, like, what Rex Dangervest tries to teach of what is considered, what should be mature, what it means to be a grown-up. Versus this alien world of it's colourful and happy, and Emmett is being upbeat and optimistic and happy, and therefore he must be childish and he must change his ways, or should he? That's all I'll say on that. But I really enjoyed that. Like I said, whereas the first movie concentrated a little more on plot development, this was more of a barrage of things that happened, like I say, that do amount to something, but it's more of a fully fledged musical this time. They must have seen how well Everything Is Awesome did in the charts last time, so they've gone out of their way to try and come up with the new Everything Is Awesome here. Not once, not twice, but there is a song called Catchy Song, which the main lyric is, this song's going to get stuck inside you, or this song's going to get stuck inside you, or this song's going to get stuck inside your head. They're obviously banking on that being the new Everything Is Awesome that people get sick of, but I'm going to go out on a limb and say that was the least catchy song of this whole movie. I enjoyed more Tiffany Haddish and her I'm Not an Evil Queen song. When she sings about being I'm Queen whatever I wanna be. And it was only when she said that out loud that I went, oh, now I get your name. But not only that, but also they do have, during the third act, when everything seems lost and hopeless and Mom-ageddon has struck. I'll leave you to work out what that is. But if you saw the first movie, it's not a million miles from what happened there. They start they're despairing and in a Toy Story 3 climax-like situation, and they start singing Everything's Not Awesome, which are the variants of which I'm sure we've all come up with ever since we got sick of Everything Is Awesome. Everything's not awesome. Everything's not cool. I am so depressed. And it starts off funny, and I had a good chuckle at that, but it does build into something genuinely rousing and orchestral and emotional, and I really enjoyed that. But also, and I think this should be the big takeaway from this movie, the end credits song that actually makes a commentary about movie end credits, which that was a great laugh. So to try and wrap this up, yes, a constant barrage of humour and references, pop culture references, but a very self-aware and intelligent, smartly written references and humour, and it keeps going with it, and overall it's a bright and colourful movie, and it reminded me very much of the recent Wreck-It Ralph 2. So by virtue of being a sequel, it's not going to be as original or impressive or mind-blowing as the first movie, but I certainly had a fun time with it, enough to push this into a buy it. Yeah. My notes going there. Despite what the box office says about it, I would not. This It's not original anymore. I get that, but it's certainly not the least impressive Lego movie. That dubious honour still belongs to the Lego Ninjago movie, in my opinion. But I do still have to ask the question: where can the Lego movie franchise possibly go from here without being repetitive and tiresome? Now, I mean, we've had bright and colourful, we've had frenetic, frantic running around, we've had the theme of absent or deadbeat fathers. Is there anything really coming up that can wow us? I'm not, let's just say I'm not really biting at the chomping at the bit for a Lego movie 3. I don't think this even really ends on a cliffhanger like the first movie did, but I was wrong before. I think there's something listed on the internet, the Billion Brick Race, which looks like it wants to be Lego Wacky Races, or Lego It's a Mad World, or Lego Rat Race. Any of you remember that? But I do have to ask, could this be the last Lego movie? And more to the point, would we even mind? If that's the case, I do want to stress that it does at least go out on a high note. Right, well, that was February, and I have to say, despite one or two perfectly watchable and entertaining movies out there, once again it looks like from the box office and critical reception that once again we have to have the latest Marvel superhero blockbuster movie, in this case Captain Marvel, come along and supposedly save the box office. Do tune in next time to see how well that goes out and what dares to go up against Captain Marvel. In the meantime, I hope you enjoyed this episode. Did you enjoy these movies? What did you think of them? Did you see anything else at the cinema during February 2019? Do comment down below and let me know. In the meantime, stay tuned to Matt's Movies, Music and More. Please do check out the other content that I and Matt have on this channel. In the meantime, I'll see you next time for March 2019, hopefully. In the meantime, take care of yourselves and each other. Peace out.